Hello everybody, I'm Nick, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how you can implement refresh token logic for your JWTs in ASP.NET Core. Something worth saying before I dive into the code is that I won't be explaining in depth what refresh tokens are and why we need them. I actually made a video dedicated to that topic, so you can now click on the top right corner of this video, go watch that video and then come back and watch this one because you might not understand what we're doing and why. I'll only briefly explain that the idea is that in our identity controller, currently we're returning a JWT token back to the user, but we want to give them a way to refresh this without actually putting the password or username and password again and again and again every time this token expires. So for that reason, we're going to be returning a refresh token back, and then this refresh token will be used in conjunction with the JWT to actually refresh this first token and get a new combo back. And I will explain how this will work. First and foremost, I need to do a minor change in my code here. So in my JWT settings, I will actually need to add a new property, and this property I will call token lifetime. And this will be a time span. So I'm going to say 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 45 seconds, and I'm going to explain why. It's basically for testing. Normally you'd have like 5 minutes here. It's up to you. So I'm going to leave this to 45 seconds for now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find where we set the lifetime of the token. In this case, it's here, 2 hours. And I have the JWT settings, as you can see. So I'm going to say just add, and I'm going to add the token lifetime, which doesn't exist, but we're going to create it. And it is going to be a time span. And here we go. Now we're going to load the lifetime from this. Another thing I need to do is I will need to register one of the things in here, the token validation parameters, in my DI container, and that's because I'm going to need to use it later in my application. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to say take this and say token validation parameters equals this value, and I'm going to use this here just like before, but on top of that I will also do services.add singleton, and I will register it in the DI container as a value I can get from anywhere. So now that I have this out of the way as well, let me go on my controllers. So currently we just returned the token. When we have auth response success, we will also need to add the refresh token here. So I'm adding the refresh token and I'm finding the usages, and I'm saying, okay, then refresh token is auth response dot refresh token. It doesn't exist. We are going to make it or create it. Okay, here we go. And if we click to this response class, we are going to add the refresh token. Now, how is this refresh token generated? That's a great question, which I will answer once I show you how our refresh endpoint would look like. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new HTTP post. It's under identity. We're just going to name it refresh, and I'm going to go ahead and create it. Now we have our refresh endpoint, and I will go back to the controller. And basically, I'm just going to copy the whole code from this and paste it here. I'm going to change this to refresh token request. And what this will have is just the token then a response. So it will look exactly the same as this one. So let me go ahead and make this. Contracts v1 requests. Here we go. And I'll just copy these two from here into this. So we need to do a refresh token async, and it's JWT and refresh token. And this part is the same, and I could actually extract it to a separate method. I might do this in the end because it's reused completely in all this. So let's go ahead and create this method. This method, just like all the others, will return an authentication result, which contains our new JWT and the refresh token. And I'm gonna go ahead and implement this class in here. And it's gonna be an async task. Now, before I move forward, I will need a helper method here, because I will need to get this token and validate it to make sure that it's something I signed and it has valid values in it. So I'm gonna create this method called getPrincipal from token, and it's gonna return a claims principal, not identity, claims principal. So getPrincipal from token. I'm just gonna get the token, which is a JWT here, and I'm gonna say give me a new token handler, which is a JWT security token handler. I totally misspelled handler here. And I'm gonna say try, because something can throw an exception here. And what I'm gonna try is, I'm gonna say get the principal from the token handler dot validate token, which this method will use these token validation parameters I talked about, which don't exist, but we're gonna inject them, and we're gonna get back the validated token. And these validation token parameters will be coming from DI. So private read-only token validation parameters. And here we go, this now works. But I also need to check that this JWT has a valid secure algorithm, which this doesn't automatically check, because if you see here in this method of token validation parameters, we only specify the key, but we don't specify the type of the key. So what I need to do is make another small help method. It's gonna be a private bool. I'm gonna say is JWT with a valid security algorithm. Nice long descriptive names. I'm gonna say get security token, which is what we get from this validated token here. This var is actually security token. So validated token, and I'm gonna say return validated token is a JWT security token, and if it is, then god damn it, why I keep saying okay. And JWT security token header dot algorithm dot equals, and I'm gonna pick the correct security algorithm, which is HMAC SHA-256, and I'm gonna make a string comparison irrelevant culture ignore. And here I have my method. So what I'm gonna say is if our token is not a valid security algorithm token, so there's something wrong with it basically, then return null. Else just return the principal. And I'm gonna add a catch here because this validate token method can't throw. So I'm gonna just return null if something is wrong with the validation of the token in general. So with that out of the way, let's go back to the method we created here. And before I implement the logic for this, I need to do the data side of things. So I'm gonna go to the domain folder, I'm gonna create a new class, and this class will be called refresh token. And this is how we're gonna represent how we're gonna store our refresh tokens in the database. So there are a bunch of properties we need to store in there. First and foremost, it's the token itself. And the token can be anything that's unique. So I'm gonna go with a GUID in this scenario. Then I also need to store the JWT ID to identify that this token belongs to this JWT ID, sorry. Then for auditing purposes, I'm gonna store the created or creation date of the token, and I will also add an expiry date for this token. And that's because even though the JWT has an expiry date and the refresh token has an expiry date, the JWT is short-lived, so it's 5-10 minutes. The refresh token is actually long-lived, so it can be 6 to 10 months or 12, whatever you want. Then I'm gonna say, is it used? So we need to store that, because if it's used, you don't want to issue another JWT with the same refresh token for security purposes. Then I'm also gonna say whether this has been invalidated or not, because in case of an incident, you might want to invalidate all the refresh tokens for the specific user and force him to provide his credentials again. A good case of this would be if they change the password or if they change their email, you might want to do that. And last but not least, we will need the user ID. And because this is entity framework, we also gonna add the identity user here in order to include them eagerly if we want to. And I'm gonna say that the value you want to be pointing towards is the user ID. So this is what our bottle looks like. This will be stored in the database. And because we created it here, we need to also add it in here. So refresh token, refresh tokens. So everything is in place. I will go ahead and create the migrations for this. So I'm gonna go in the terminal and say .NET EF migrations add. I'm gonna name it added refresh tokens. So our migration has been created. You can see it here. So let me close this. The controller is like this. So let me close this as well. Then let me go back to the method we need to implement. And this method has quite the logic in it. And it is a bit of a long one, but I'm gonna break it down to as smaller pieces as possible and check everything to show you what's going on. And you can choose to group some of these errors together if you want to. So first and foremost, we need to get the validated token. And I did say get principal from token. If the validated token equals null, which is when it's not actually valid, then we're gonna go ahead and say return new authentication result. And this authentication result has errors, which is a new array with a single invalid token error. With this initial check out of the way about our token, we also need to check that it's not expired. Actually, we need to check that it is expired, because if it's not expired, the user can use this, so we don't want to let them refresh. This is optional. You could actually let them refresh if you wanted to, but I'm just going to show you how you can check that, and if you want, you can comment this method, actually this part out. It's not mandatory. I still want to show you how it works though. So I'm going to say expiry date in Unix, and this will be a long, and we're going to get that from the claims in the validated token. So validated token dot claims dot single, and I'm going to say type equals to JWT registered claims dot expiry dot value. And now we have the expiry date in Unix. However, we need to change this to a date time expiry to a date time. So we're going to say expiry date time UTC equals a new date time, which starts from the 1st of January in 1970. And the reason why we do that is because that is the Unix epoch, and this form of way we store the date in the token is essentially seconds from this date onwards. So we need to do some conversion to actually change it to a date time that C# likes. And now that we have that, we're gonna say add seconds, and this expiry date is actually the seconds passed from this date, which represents the date that this JWT expires. And I'm also gonna say subtract, and I am going to remove the token lifetime from this date to represent whether it's in the past or not. So with all those checks, all I need to do is if expiry date UTC is in the future, it means it's not here yet. So we cannot refresh this yet. We can say this token hasn't expired yet. So first I'm gonna get the JWT ID from the claim, and the claim is, let me just copy this so I don't have to type the whole thing again. And the claim is called JTI, and this is the ID of the token, and we need to validate that this token ID is actually the same as the refresh token, so we're gonna do some database stuff. So we're gonna get the stored refresh token from the database, and we have no access to the data store. So we're gonna say private read-only data context, and I'm gonna inject that as well. And I'm going to say refresh tokens dot singular default async, where the token equals to refresh token, and this will give me the stored refresh token. Now, if this returns null, which means it doesn't exist, then we need to tell the user that, hey, this refresh token doesn't exist. If it does exist, we need to check some other stuff. First and foremost, datetime dot UTC now, and all the dates should be in UTC. That's what you want to be checking. Stored token expiry date, which means that this token has expired, so you cannot use it. This refresh token has expired. I know this can be too much, but I'm breaking it down as much as possible. All these checks can be summed up, if you want to, with OR statements and just say invalid token, which is the ideal approach. So you don't let your users know why this is invalid. But I'm going to show you how each check is done. Then we need to check whether the token has been invalidated. So if it has been invalidated, then this refresh token has been invalidated. Nice and easy. Also, if this token has been used, you need to say this refresh token has been used. And if this token dot JWT ID does not equal the one in the JWT we just got, then this refresh token does not match this JWT. And these are all the checks we need to do. At this point, we can say stored refresh token dot used equals true, because we're gonna set it true in the database. We're gonna get the context and say refresh tokens dot update, and of course we need to save. So context dot save changes async. The last thing we need to do is get the actual user from the database. And there's other ways you can do this, but I'm gonna do it the simple way. We're gonna get them by ID, and their ID will be coming from the token. So good old claims. Actually, let me just copy this because I'm lazy. And this should be ID, which represents the user ID. I might have to rename this to make it more self-explanatory. And once I have this, I'm gonna do return generate this for user. But there are some changes that need to happen in this method as well. And those changes have to do with the refresh token. So at this point, we need to actually create a refresh token to store in the database. So I'm gonna say new refresh token. The JWT ID is the token.id, which is the token ID. Then I'm gonna say not used, but user ID equals user.id. The creation date is datetime UTC now. And the expiry date, I could make this configurable, but I'm just gonna say UTC now.add months, and I'm going to say add 6 months here. And I of course need to store this in the database, so context.refreshTokens.addAsync refresh token. I need to await this, and I also need to save changes async. And last but not least, I do need to return this token, so refresh token.refresh.token. Now let's make this method an async method, so async task, and let's also rename it to yada async. And we need to await all of these, so 1, 2, 3. Before I show you this working, I want you to go to the identity service, and where we initialize this expiry date time UTC, I actually did a mistake. We do not need to subtract this date here because it's already added in the token, so there's no need for that. So with that out of the way, let's just run it and see what we have. So first and foremost, let's go ahead and log in to get a combination. I'm gonna use my test account, so make 1, 2, 3 exclamation mark. And I get a token and a refresh token. Now if I go straight to the refresh endpoint and I try to use those to refresh, I'm gonna get an error saying this token hasn't expired yet. And this is a check we just fixed. So if I wait 45 seconds, and for you it's just gonna be 2 seconds, we'll see how this will actually refresh it. So let's wait and see. So the 45 seconds have passed. If I now execute this again, sure enough, I'm getting a new combination of token and refresh token. And if I try to refresh this refresh token again, and just let me save this because I might need it, then you will see that the refresh token has already been used. Now if I use this refresh token, and if I find here and I say, okay, you need to expire 1 month ago, and save this and execute again, you'll see that the refresh token has expired. And the only way we can deal with this now is force the user to log in with their credentials again to make this new combination again. Otherwise, we can just keep going if the refresh token hasn't been expired. So this is it for this video, quite a long one, but I fully explained how you can implement this so you can now use it in your own applications. Leave a like if you like this content, subscribe and ring the bell to see all the notifications for whenever I upload, and I'll see you in the next video. Keep coding.